Hey, and we are the Coalition. We are here at Harris Hall, your City of Woonsocket City Council chamber. I'm here with John Ward. He is now not just the freshly minted, newly minted, he is through baptism of fire, if you will, the Woonsocket City Council chair. Of course, always remember that Woonsocket is, in fact, the Paris of Northern Rhode Island. A busy meeting. It's all up on the Facebook. You can watch it all. He's had a full and rewarding day. So a couple of areas that I want to focus on briefly. A hot button issue in the community now since LBH has left the building, has been, of course, the fate, if you will, of the city planning director. That came full circle tonight as there was a move to effectively dock part of his salary for the rest of this year. What happened? And there's an implication by some folks in the community that this is somehow a witch hunt, or that we need to let it go, or that citizens should it's time to move on. The Rhode Islanders are tired of hearing it's time to move on. That went out with 38 Studios, I'm sorry. All right, that went out with that because it's always time to move on. But what are you and folks, again, we'll try and edit down and put out some clips. But if you could, give us your thoughts on the matter right now, because your statements were pretty provocative in an era when you've been very measured.
I have been very measured, but I'm going to start by correcting you on something. And that is, we are not the Paris of Northern Rhode Island. We are the Quebec City.
Okay.
This is a Canadian heritage community, not a Parisian community. So that's out of the way. That takes care of the important matter. In terms of the other matter, I have been measured. I've been trying to be diplomatic about it without screaming, yelling, calling names. But the fact is, the members of the prior administration involved in all of this debacle over the purchase of property using HUD funds without consulting with the council, the solicitor, the public works director, doing all the things wrong you could possibly do. One resigned, one was fired, and the other was held up on a pedestal, spoken about as a true gentleman who was going to benefit the city going forward, and that may be very true, but it completely lacked any sense of accountability for what he did. His participation over the course of anywhere from 12 to 15 months in dealing with the acquisition of property that is inappropriate, possibly dealing with an acquisition of another property that would have been illegal, using federal funds without coming to the council for approval for the expenditure of over $1 million. And he was complicit in doing that and negotiating, purchase and sales agreements and closing documents and signatures on and off. And there's a lot of information that we have as raw information. As many people know, we've had the information or the data put available publicly on the city's website and the council page. But that hasn't really been analyzed by anybody with any kind of legal expertise. Our solicitor hasn't done it because that's not really his role. He's got lots of work to do. And the council authorized the hiring of an investigator back last November, and this is now February, so it's been a few months that we've been struggling to collect as much information as we can. We're getting to the point where they've run out of things to give us, and there's people who haven't answered questions or refuse to. So the point is, with the planning director, he can easily be implicated in this process as a driving force behind this transaction with the former finance director and the former mayor, and yet nothing's happened. So this isn't about dragging it on, and it should have been done 3 months ago. It should have been done immediately. It should not have had to have waited till tonight for the rest of the ordinance to amend his pay to actually lose on a 3-2 affirmative vote, because of the technical requirement in our city charter that any ordinance requires an approval of the majority of the whole body, which is 4 out of 7. And so, that being the case, we had to simply at least go on the record to make the statement about accountability in sound government management that has not taken place in this situation. And I can appreciate the mayor in his acting capacity as the mayor by default, taking the position that he needs the support of the planning director and the department that follows him to get things done. And so if that's his need, that's fine. But my need as a council person elected by the same people who elected him and the former mayor is to them. And my need is to make it clear that my expectation for the city is when somebody does something like this and participates, there's an accountability for what you've done, and it somehow represents either a loss of employment or some effect on your compensation. And I'm sorry if it's somebody that's been here 35 years, but you know what? Life offers lots of challenges that you have to contend with, and how you choose to contend with them is meaningful.
You spoke eloquently to the notion that individuals are forced at times in their lives to make decisions, moral decisions, as part of their employment.
Especially in government.
Right. And that appears to be a stunning failure here to do that at any level throughout the former mayor's administration, and in most particularly the city planning office.
It was too often the case throughout her administration, and it was oftentimes simply people saw it over the years. The turnover in City Hall was astounding, and the only rational explanation for it is simply the fact that people were going to do things according to the mayor's demands, or they would be unemployed. Several people left for jobs in other communities at much less pay, simply because they reached the end of their rope, they wouldn't tolerate it, and they found a job somewhere else in a similar position, but sometimes at less pay.
So those folks made the tough decision.
They made the tough decision, right? They stood up and said, "No, I refuse to do this,"
right?
And they left. I've done it in my life, and you make these choices in your life, and if you're going to hang around and participate in whatever's going on, you have to be ready to accept whatever punishment comes in order to provide assurance to the public that the city's going to be run properly, and we won't tolerate it, and there'll be accountability on the part of the people that participated.
Now, there's been two specific instances post Mendon Road where it's clear to an outsider like me that the city planning office continues to test the boundaries, operate outside of the communication that appears to be necessary between a working city council and a planning office. And I'm talking specifically about the fiasco surrounding the church and the grant from the state for service during snow emergencies and weather emergencies to the homeless. And then even this evening, there seems to be, as an outsider, a willful intent, action to subvert the stated reasonable desires of sitting city councilmen. And of course, I'm talking about Councilman Manseri's frustration over the last 6 months trying to get his work done. At this point, given the slap on the wrist that he got tonight,
he didn't.
Well, I mean,
the public scolding.
The public scolding. Is there any chance that his behavior is going to change, or did we just enable it, sort of like an ill-behaved toddler?
I can't speak to that, except that I would expect that the mayor will understand what the frustrations come from, and will take care of his management of that department sufficiently to fix it. And if he doesn't, then we will keep bringing it forward as a discussion item and do the best we can as a council in trying to get through that.
Excellent.
But again, with Councilman Manseri's ordinance that I warned would likely have to be reintroduced and go through the public advertising process, the public hearing process, the planning board again. They insisted on taking a vote, and it failed on a positive vote of 3-2. And now it's going to have to start from the beginning again. And that's unfortunate, because now it's more money we have to spend on advertising, and the time's not so much the element, but it's the money on the advertising for nothing. Public hearing on something that I'm sure nobody will attend, but will have to be taking place.
Right.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
And then there's always the potential ramification of delayed economic development, investment.
There is that possibility. Yes, that's always a possibility, and that's why I asked about that. How many parties are involved in this that are currently in process? And at this point, it was just one. But that doesn't mean that there's not others sitting by watching to see if it's a possibility for them sometime in the future.
One other concern of the Coalition Radio Network, if you will, since the early days of, if you will, the new management here in Woonsocket, has been the notion that every time, and the analogy we use is every time you open a drawer or pick up a folder or open the mail, we're starting to call it the Abatement of the Month Club, where there are these landmines awaiting a city council in terms of judgments, in terms of settlements, in terms of real money.
Yes, millions. There's millions.
Millions that were, and these are my words, were mistakenly and misrepresented as budget surpluses, which in fact were essentially collect and delay factors for money that walking into a potential recession industrial northeastern city will now have to find out of pocket to replace.
Exactly. That describes it well, and it's been something since I got reelected to the council back in 2018. It has concerned me. I have brought it up. I have demanded listings, and the former solicitor got around when we insisted upon reporting for each meeting or each month from the administration. The solicitor would provide us with a list of litigation cases, far too many of which related to tax assessment and valuations and court cases, because the former tax assessor would either not go to the assessment board of review hearings, and they would immediately appeal. The board would deny, and they would appeal to the court, and they're in court. So we had this huge number of cases in court for multiple years, and yeah, we're just trying to get around to finalizing it and settling them. But there's multiples beyond $1 million, well beyond $1 million, possibly $2 or more million, in tax money that was collected, called revenue in the past, that will now either need to be credited off into the future or refunded, either way, which becomes a deficit this year or a hardship against the tax levy in the future years. And that's a real problem for subsequent mayors and subsequent administrations and subsequent councils and subsequent taxpayers. It's not fair, but unfortunately that kind of manipulation, it's not the first time it's happened in this city. There was a time when we actually had to issue a bond to settle tax cases previously. And it's tragic that it has to happen, but I don't think we'll end up in that situation, but we have to confront the real challenge of settling these things. And I'm comfortable now that we have a tax assessor without the yoke around his neck of the prior administration causing things to happen that aren't reasonable, and we can have an honest and reasonable discussion about values, about setting a tax rate that's going to be reasonable against all of the classifications of property, and do the best we can to make up for that without overburdening one class of taxpayers over the other.
If you could briefly explain the mechanics, and check me on this. From tonight's conversation and other conversations, I've walked away with the concept that a city places an assessment on a property. Before the taxpayer can challenge the assessment, they in fact have to pay the tax. And once they do so, they can engage in, if you will, work efforts leading up ultimately to potential litigation.
Yes.
To get that money back. Is that how it really works?
That's how it works. It's under state statute that occurs in that sequence. If a taxpayer is going to, first when the values are set in a revaluation, they have a chance to appeal to the revaluation firm. That often fails. Then it goes into the assessment process and the tax levy creation through the tax roll, and the bill is sent, and they can appeal. But in order to appeal, they have to be current on their taxes. They have to pay the bill. So they pay the full amount and they appeal. The assessor first has to review the appeal, and then either approve the change or deny it. Normally denied, goes to the Tax Assessment Board of Review for a hearing. And they then can adjust in agreement with the taxpayer, or agree with the tax assessor and reject, or something in between. And if that's accepted, then the taxpayer settles, they get a refund, or they get an adjustment in the future, and it takes care of the problem. Or they have the right, they always have the right to appeal to the Superior Court, go in there with their expert testimony, require the city to go in with its expert testimony and have a debate over the value. And generally, it's not in the court's usual nature to decide. The court's decision usually is get out of here and go settle it.
Right.
And so they get settled, but it costs money if you got these large taxpayers like shopping plazas and manufacturing companies and utility companies. We have a case with the Blackstone Valley Electric Company over their tangible list. That's a very expensive proposition that is in a court where by their complaint, they testify that, or assert, and I don't know that it's ever been debated, that when the Tax Assessment Board of Review ordered the former tax assessor to provide an explanation of her value that was so much higher than the utility said, she provided nothing. And so they were never given the argument from the city about why there was such an extreme value increase in their tangibles. And so they took it to court, and it's still being litigated, and it's being negotiated. And based upon their claim, it could cost the city above $1.1 million, possibly, depending on how much the interest cost
Ouch.
is.
Because, on top of this, on top of the obvious impact of this fictional income, and by the way, if you are a publicly traded company, the SEC would take you to the woodshed, all right? Besides that, and the notion you have to pay it back, there's the tangible costs associated with legal representation by the city, the legal representation cost to the plaintiff. There's the opportunity cost that business may or may not realize and not be able to invest into their business. The intangible cost, though, I think is even greater, and that's the reputation of the city as a place, an environment, a community that's attractive to do business in, if in fact word is out that you guys are, not you guys, but the prior sheriff in town was essentially setting up a property tax speed trap alongside of the road.
Well, it's exactly that, and it's done oftentimes for political motives, where politicians who want to retain their position will do everything that they can to make sure that the impact to the residential homeowner, otherwise known as those people who actually vote, the impact to them is minimized at the expense of seeing what you can get away with on the much larger taxpayers and burdening them with more while you burden the residential with less. You get reelected as a hero election after election. And in fact, what you've done is basically laid the landmine for the future.
It's a Ponzi scheme. It's a municipal
Somewhat,
Ponzi scheme.
yeah.
So in closing, and again, we're here with John Ward. He's the city councilor for the Quebec, whatever, of Northern Rhode Island, Montreal.
Bonjour, mes amis.
Is there any ballpark number, range of total liability that the former mayor left behind?
Speculatively, I would say with all of the cases we're talking about, it's going to be something in the range of $2 million.
Oh,
Now, keep in mind, we have an unreserved surplus of about $8 million on our books as of 2022. I don't know what it is as of 2023 because that year hasn't been audited and closed out that I'm aware of. But if $8 million, $2 million is about 25%.
right. And those are checks that are just going to start flying out the door.
Well, if it's not checks that are flying out the door, what it is it's a reduction of our future, or it's an increased burden to the taxpayers tomorrow to make up for the credits we have to offer as part of the settlements against the future.
Okay. Well, Council President, thank you again for your time, and we'll continue this. Carol Burnett, a little bit of gallows humor, used to do a shtick on soap operas, and on her variety show back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, And it was a takeoff on soap operas, and it was called As the Stomach Turns. And,
Oh, I thought you were talking about soap. That was a takeoff on soap operas.
well, you know, there's an element to that here. But I will say that I think congratulations are in order for just going through this moment, this, for lack of a better term, forgive my humor, municipal enema that seems to have to take place right now in terms of what are the true finances of the city of Woonsocket. And should have happened years ago. I guess in one sense, taxpayers should be grateful it's finally happening now. So thank you very much.
Yes, and there are some people who were in office in the past that I'm sure right now would love to be able to tell the public, I told you so.
On that note, thank you.